So welcome, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. I'm so glad to welcome everyone to the discussion panel of the International Conference PALE-2020. And as far as we're already concerned, the key discussion point of this panel is business, how post-capitalism would look like. So before we commence, let me please pay your attention to the fact that the topic of this panel is a question, not a statement. That's why you are all welcome to discuss. And overall, the discussion panel today is attended by scientists and experts from 3 countries: Ukraine, the USA, and Great Britain. I am sincerely honored to be a moderator on this discussion panel today. So I'm Irina Lopatyuk, and let me please introduce our speakers. So, Oleg Maltsev, Ukraine, author, researcher, criminologist, psychologist, academician of Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, founder and director of the Memory Institute, head of Expeditionary Corps. Dr. Maltsev is an author of numerous books in the areas such as applied history, sociology, deep psychology, philosophy, criminalistics, and criminology. Welcome. The next expert is Konstantinos Lobodynyuk, Ukraine. He is the head of the Scientific Council of the Institute of Information Security, Associate Fellow of the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, Editor-in-Chief of the newspaper Unsolved Crimes. The next expert is our dear expert from the United Kingdom, Athina Karatzogianni, professor in media and communication at the University of Leicester. She has an extensive record of publications in disciplinary and cross-disciplinary research outlets. Dr. Karatzogianni has demonstrated success in securing research income from research councils of UK and the European Commission. The next speaker is Geoffrey Brian West, the USA. Theoretical physicist, former president and distinguished professor of Santa Fe Institute. He is the author of several books, among which is Scale, The Universal Laws of Growth, Innovation, Sustainability, and the Pace of Life in Organisms, Cities, Economies, and Companies. He is a visiting professor at Imperial College, London, as well as an associate fellow at Oxford University. And one more speaker from Ukraine as well, Vyacheslav Lysenko, entrepreneur, founder of Ukraine-China Communication, co-founder of Young Business Club, member of the supervisory board of CEO Club Ukraine, an expert in Ukrainian-Chinese relations in the area of foreign economic activity. So, first of all, before we start, let me please deliver a few words about the reference terms of this panel. So, I mean that each speaker today holds the opportunity to answer 3 questions. These 3 questions were formulated and presented to all of you in advance. And please let me be emphatic about the limit. So, the limit of the extent of answers is up to 7 or 8 minutes, no longer, please. Okay, so to begin with, we shall start the discussion on the first issue of the panel. Afterwards, we're switching to the second issue, and so on. So let me please kindly remind you the first question. And the first question is as follows. What should a businessman do during the transition to post-capitalism of modern society? How it would be possible to organize a business activity in times of economic crisis? I mean, outline, offline, or a combination. But at this moment, I give the floor to Professor Geoffrey Brian West. So please, you're welcome.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm slightly nervous about beginning this discussion because obviously there's no simple answers to this, and many of the things embodied in the question itself need some explanation, like what do we mean by post-capitalism? Are we going to be moving into a post-capitalist society? Does that simply mean that there's more or less government involvement, and so on and so forth? I think the big issue there, as far as I'm concerned, and I maybe come back and talk about it, is the transition from one extreme, meaning that companies are there not just to facilitate between, so to speak, the original idea between artisans and the community, but to make a profit. And that's the fundamental driving force in the past. But I think what has been evolving slowly and certainly more rapidly in the last couple of years is a transition towards an idea of social responsibility for companies, and in some ways taking over roles that we've often thought of are either embodied in the culture or are part of what governments and administrations facilitate. So And so the whole question about what we mean by post-capitalism and what we mean by a company are both not very well defined concepts. However, having said that, I would say that some of the things that are very clear in the present circumstance is that, first of all, when you have a major impact, major perturbation like the one we're going through now, that inevitably is an accelerator of processes that are already in place. Not only starts new things, but perhaps more importantly, it accelerates things that are already happening, such as what we're doing now. Namely, we would not have had such a meeting on a website like this before, but even when we return to some more stable configuration, this will continue. This will certainly continue. And of course, it's emblematic of a greater and greater shift towards the presence and domination of IT, and therefore the role of IT and the use of all its adjuncts like machine learning, AI, and so on, in formulating how businesses are run. But so the other question involved in this is, what should businesses do? Well, I'm not a businessman. I'm an academic who has studied businesses. But I think one of the things that becomes very clear is, first of all, if you want your business to survive, one of the things that one has learned from the past is that the first fundamental thing is all businesses eventually die anyway. Usually their lifetime is not very long. In the United States, even a successful business that is already posted on the on the New York Stock Exchange, for example, cannot expect to survive for more than about 10 years. So already you have this dynamic of relatively short lifespans. Now, of course, there are many exceptions to that, but more generally, if we're talking generally about how companies are going to survive, they need to, first of all, learn lessons as to what kills them in circumstances that aren't in a crisis. And what typically kills them is that they have quickly become ossified. They tend to, after a burst of energy at the beginning, innovative, they quickly lose that spark of innovation. They get dominated by bureaucracy and administration, the very things we accuse governments of doing, but companies tend to do that. And the way they can survive is, of course, and the way they do survive is like the way cities survive, is the only way is to reinvent yourselves at various times. So it's very important that at times of crisis, when the propensity is to contract and to get rid of those parts of the company that are innovative because they're long-term phenomena, and to think short-term is to think long-term and take advantage of opportunities that undoubtedly will occur, are occurring, in order to, so to speak, either maintain or reinvent oneself. And there's a long history of that. And I would say that most companies that get themselves into trouble, and in the United States, the major ones that you're familiar with are things like General Motors and such companies, all ones that are dying now. Sears Roebuck has just died, and so forth. They were all bailed out by the government. So there's again, this funny interconnection with the government. And so the things that we have to do is, in terms of a company, is adapt to the new conditions, keep innovation at the forefront, change with the conditions. That means be more flexible, obviously adapt to the situation of people working at home when they don't need to be physically together necessarily at all times, and so on. So I think this is, there's a lot of lessons to be learned, but the key one is the question of being flexible and adaptable. And I think also, and this is a very difficult one, is to have, especially for companies that haven't done it, is to engender a culture, I find a funny word, of caring. of actually being supportive of employees and to recognize the struggles that people are going through. So, that's my lead-off statement. I'll come back. I'll stop there because I've probably talked already my 7 or 8 minutes. And I consider that a lead-in to some of the other questions, but also possibly to a discussion of some of these in more detail.
Thank you so much, Dr. West. So let me please give the floor to the Dr. Oleg Maltsev. So please, you're welcome.
1 minute. Спасибо, что дали мне слово.
Thank you for giving me a word.
Да, я очень рад вас всех видеть.
I'm very glad to see all of you here.
И я смотрю, у нас такой представительный состав сегодня.
And as I see, we have very distinguished and extraordinary people gathered today in one place.
Но он какой-то не совсем справедливый.
But I would say it is not, it's not fair enough to have such a combination of people in one place.
3 профессора против одного бизнесмена, как я говорю на панели, и одного эксперта. Давайте мы как бы уравняем шансы. Я сегодня откажусь быть профессором и побуду бизнесменом. Я все-таки бизнесмен.
And since the composition, roughly speaking, the composition is like 3 academicians, 3 professors versus 1 businessman, this is not fair enough. So that is why today I will step in and speak not as an academician, but more as a businessman, because I have my business activity as well.
Да, мы с коллегой будем говорить как бизнесмены, будут говорить 2 выдающихся профессора, и нас рассудит 1 эксперт. И это будет, наверное, самая потрясающая панель за конференцию.
So I think this is going to be the most memorable panel in the course of this conference, because we would have 2 professors that would be evaluating things as well. We would have 2 businessmen, me and my colleague, and we will have 1 expert that would be steps aside and looks at the situation from the outside.
Я попытаюсь ответить на эти 2 вопроса достаточно коротко, как бы и понятно.
I'll do my best to answer these 2 questions precisely, shortly, and as simple as I can.
Что будет после? Думаю, как бы изменится 3 вещи.
So what is going to happen afterwards? I think we will see 3 major changes, 3 things.
Большинство бизнесменов люди консервативные.
Most of the businessmen are quite conservative people.
И, наверное, вот эта ситуация, она вот, в общем-то, наиболее ярко продемонстрировала вот некую расслоенность бизнеса во всех странах, и в Европе, и в Америке, и в США, и в Латинской Америке, и в Африке, везде, по всему земному шару.
And I believe that this situation demonstrated us how multi-level is business all over the world, in every place of the world, be it on every continent. It has different levels.
То есть, по сути, существует 2 вида компаний.
So to put it simply, we have 2 types of companies.
Те, кто выиграли в пандемию, и те, кто сильно потерпели убытки в пандемии.
So the first category is the companies that did win, they were advantageous in this situation, and the other category of companies are the ones that basically went bankrupt, that lost a lot of money.
И поверьте, это случайность.
And believe me, this is a coincidence.
Потому что свои виды деятельности, которые у них были в момент пандемии, они выбирали давным-давно.
Because for the reason that they chose their own, their main type of activity of business long before the pandemics took place.
И когда они пришли к вот этому старту пандемии, то это были виды деятельности, которые в пандемию наоборот развиваются и прогрессируют, и виды деятельности, которые останавливаются в момент пандемии.
So when this pandemic, when the corona crisis has started, So there are some companies that actually continue their activity even better maybe, or accelerate their activity, and the other type of activities, they just stop. They cannot survive in these conditions.
То есть сегодня как бы важным станет сам выбор деятельности.
So today, what is going to be important is a choice, the selection of the type of activity the businessman is engaged in.
То есть сам вот этот объект инвестирования денег, времени и так далее и тому подобное.
So in other words, what is important is the object, is the thing that you are investing in.
То есть люди долго еще не отойдут от этой пандемии.
I'm sure that the consequences that this pandemic will bring us is going to stay with people for a long time.
Когда человек теперь будет подходить к созданию нового бизнеса, он будет думать, а что будет с этим бизнесом в пандемию?
Every time one will have an idea of establishing a new business, he will always ask himself, what is going to happen to this entity? Is it going to survive or not?
Понятное дело, что любой бизнесмен хочет, чтобы его бизнес был неуязвим, а любые обстоятельства вокруг только способствовали его развитию.
I mean, logically, every businessman desires so that his business is invulnerable to any type of conditions, and no matter what, his thing is just getting bigger and bigger and more successful.
И те люди, которые сейчас после пандемии будут проектировать свое будущее, им нужно думать, во что вкладывать свои средства, время, деньги, и как это вот в такой ситуации, как пандемия, или в других каких-то ситуациях, как бы будет работать, то есть эти ситуации будут играть на руку этому бизнесу, или все-таки они будут его разрушать?
And so now people that are thinking about planning their future, people that are thinking where to invest their time, resources, and money, they have to make a very careful and wise choice. I mean, they have to answer a question. If something like this happens again, be it coronavirus pandemic or maybe something else, different crisis, will their businesses keep on working or will they just shut down?
Так, и поэтому, с моей точки зрения, бизнес должен развернуться в сторону науки.
And in my viewpoint, I think that business should allocate its attention, it should turn its attention towards science.
Я не знаю, насколько бизнес станет еще более электронным, но то, что он станет наукоемким, иначе не выжить. Это точно.
I don't know to what extent businesses will become even more electronic and digitalized. However, what I'm sure about is that without science, businesses are not going to be able to survive.
Дело в том, что ни один бизнесмен, он как бы не имеет в своем составе никаких научных подразделений, ему достаточно сложно что-то предвидеть или что-то сходу создавать, не обращаясь больше ни к кому.
Almost no businessman has a special department that is engaged in the research activity that would be capable of providing him like information for prognosis, something, I mean, high quality information that he can use to. So that is why, I mean, it's very hard for them to, I mean, understand and analyze things for the future in the long term.
И я думаю, что бизнес — это прежде всего люди.
And in my opinion, in the first place, business is always about people.
И очень качественно изменится отношение к персоналу, то есть к подбору кадров.
Thus, the approach will drastically change. It's going to be more related to the selection of the staff, of people that you are going to be working with.
Доктор Уэст сравнил пандемию с войной.
For instance, we know from different online panels that Professor Geoffrey West did compare this pandemic with the war, figuratively.
Представьте себе, что у вас война и у вас нет солдат.
And imagine now that you are in the war and you have no soldiers.
У вас персонал предприятия, который привык работать в других условиях.
So basically, you have people that are used to working in completely different conditions.
То есть, по сути, это предприятие обречено.
In a nutshell, that company would be doomed.
И следующий момент, на котором мне хотелось бы остановиться, это момент, связанный с предохранительными мерами.
And another point that I would like to highlight is preventive measures.
Я думаю, что будет развиваться некий рынок предохранительных мер по причине того, что даже страховой бизнес в этом случае, как вы видите, и в пандемию, и в прочих ситуациях, он уже как бы, ну, становится неактуальным для большого, малого, если для любого бизнеса.
I believe that in the future we will see an emergence of this preventive measures market, because even insurance as a huge sphere itself, it is not enough, as we see for many companies, and not only companies, for many other institutions.
Я в двух словах объясню, что я имею в виду. Представьте себе страховую компанию, в которой одновременно за страховыми случаями обращаются 200 человек одновременно. Представляете, что будет с этой страховой компанией?
And now I will elaborate by giving a simple life example. So just imagine you have an insurance company and there are 200 people, clients coming at the same time. I mean, physically, that insurance company will not be capable of serving everybody.
То есть страховой бизнес построен по принципу, что проблемы возникают реже, чем обращение в страховую компанию.
Because the foundation of the insurance business is in the fact that they suppose that they receive much less requests than services that they provide.
То есть речь идет о обращении за услугой страховой.
So it's about the client requests for the service.
Вот эти три момента, мне кажется, сильно изменятся в период постпандемии. Что касается, что делать в период самой пандемии, я тоже постараюсь быстро суммировать.
So aforementioned things, these are three things that I think are going to emerge after, during this post-pandemic period. And as for what has to be done during the pandemic period, I will try to shortly describe that thing.
У меня мало времени, поэтому я постараюсь кратко. Ну, первое, наверное, самое главное для бизнесмена — это не потерять людей, как бы тех, кто с ним работает.
So the first important thing, I think it is important for a businessman not to lose his people that he's working with.
Это может произойти по-разному, они все заболеть могут.
And it may unfold in different ways. For instance, they may get sick.
Могут испугаться, уволиться и вообще на работу не приходить.
They might fear, just be in a bad condition and might stop coming to the workplace.
Множество факторов.
There are many different factors that are in the play.
Второе — это максимально снизить последствия самой пандемии, которая останавливает бизнес и не дает им работать, как бы, и не дает, как бы, нормально функционировать экономике.
And the second thing that people should pay attention to currently during pandemic period is to try to maximally decrease the consequences of this crisis, things that are basically being an obstacle for a normally functioning organization.
Представьте себе корабль, который получил несколько пробоин.
So let's consider an example. If we look at the ship that end up having several holes in the ship.
Да. На корабле подобного рода проблемы устраняет аварийная команда.
And during this type of situations on the ship, in the sea, in the ocean, a certain emergency team has to take care of that hole.
Да. У бизнеса обычно такой структуры в ее составе не существует.
And as a matter of fact, usually businesses do not have such an emergency team.
Поэтому, с моей точки зрения, ее важно сформировать в самое короткое время.
And I believe it has to be formed as soon as possible if business wants to survive.
Из самых подготовленных кадров.
And that emergency unit should include the most well-prepared specialists.
Ну а впоследствии, я думаю, что когда мы говорим о службе прогнозирования и консультирования, которая, вероятнее всего, станет после пандемии неотъемлемой частью бизнеса.
And as for the last part, I think that in the post-pandemic world, consulting services and prognosis institutions are going to become indispensable for businesses.
Да, я думаю, что именно эта команда, которая отработала эту пандемию, успешно, неуспешно, это уже в зависимости от предприятия, она и должна впоследствии составить в фирме отдел вот этого самого прогнозирования и консультирования, который будет помогать директору как бы принимать управленческие решения в период постпандемии и впоследствии деятельности предприятия.
And as we have termed that emergency unit, a group of people that was fighting and was trying to keep this business working during the pandemic period, it should become that entity, the consulting and prognosis team, which would be basically helping the director of the company in the future.
Вот вкратце, как я вижу действия бизнеса в рамках пандемии и в период постпандемии, какие будут изменения.
So this is how I see the situation of business during the pandemic and after the pandemic, if to put it really briefly and simply.
Спасибо большое.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maltsev. And please let me ask our next expert. So the discussion will continue. The Professor Athina Karatzogianni. Please welcome. You may deliver your speech.
Hi, yes, thank you for your invitation again. This is the third panel that I participate in, and I found it very enjoyable. So, I mean, for me, the key question is what kind of world does this businessman operate in, like in the post-COVID kind of scenario? And there has been, because of the financial crisis in 2007, we've been through a decade of economic crisis, political crisis, social crisis, polarization, conflict, and that has created inequalities, global inequalities, and this kind of problem now I think is going to become worse unless there is an understanding that the business world cannot continue to base their mentality of how they operate in the world, you know, to base it only on making profit and copyright and safeguarding just their own interest, that they have a responsibility also to what is happening in the world, right? And in that sense, I think there is an effort for example, to understand that if there is more use of automation and AI, and there is more in the automation side of things, that could be used where you have less reliance on the concept of we have scarcity, we need to ensure profit because there's scarcity and so on. So you can have a society that is looking at using new technology in the service of a better society, where you have, for example, more open access to knowledge, taking care more of the environment and fighting climate change, like looking at these areas of what a business can do to actually not just look at profit and survival, but actually what kind of life are they and what kind of contribution they're making to society, what kind of ethical contribution they're making to society. And I think it is in that respect that I think businessmen and women and people working in the corporate world, and there are many of those out there, could use some of their innovations, some of the ideas to actually improve areas such as global inequality, areas such as climate change, areas such as breaking down monopolies and this kind of hungry zombie capitalism kind of thing that we have had in late neoliberalism, in late neoliberal capitalism. And I think this is something that slowly, perhaps this crisis has brought certain issues, has accentuated these issues. So we're building, maybe we can see that we're building on a quicksand, and now the quicksand is starting to absorb everything. I think it's time to actually understand that business practices have to change in a way if sort of a common humanity can actually work on the basis of mutual aid and support and creating a society that is better for everybody, not just for the few people that are making profit and put profit above else. So I know that this sounds like too normative in the sense as an approach, but I think that changing that mentality from not just thinking about profit, but thinking about the quality of the products and the services that business people offer and their companies offer to the world, and having a good think about that and what this innovation actually means. Is it an innovation just to make money and safeguard copyright and kind of like engage in the zombie capitalism cycle of destruction, or is this for the improvement of the lives of people around them? Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your speech. And by this moment, please let me give the floor to Vyacheslav Lysenko. So please, you're welcome.
Hello. I'm sorry, I don't have a lot of practice, English language practice, and I will make a lot of mistake, and I speak Russian. Добрый день, здравствуйте. Действительно очень приятно такая встреча. Олег еще и уравнял наши команды. Я практикующий бизнесмен, у меня достаточно много бизнесов и большой опыт. 20 лет я в Китае развивал много бизнесов, но сейчас это во многих странах. И для меня было очень интересно посмотреть, как разные бизнесы во время карантина вели себя. И основная философия, которая мне очень, в принципе, нравится на Востоке, это карантин, это как форма кризиса.
Вы делаете паузу?
Да.
My name is Vyacheslav Lysenko, and I'm very happy to be today in this panel, and thanks to Dr. Maltsev that he equalized kind of our roles. So now I'm not a sole businessman in this panel. And I should say that I've been in this business practice for many, many years. I myself own several businesses, and most of my activity extends to China. I've been working there for 25 years, and now my business operates in many, many other countries. For me personally, it was very interesting to see how different countries and businesses react to this pandemic situation. For instance, when we speak about Eastern countries, what I like about their philosophy is that it is quite different.
И на Востоке кризис состоит из двух иероглифов. Это потери и возможности. И каждый бизнес считается так, что за потери не беспокойтесь, они о вас сами беспокоятся. А фокусируйтесь на возможностях.
And what I like about this Eastern philosophy is the way they look at the crisis. For instance, they have two letters that comprises the word crisis, and one is losses and the other is opportunities. And how they think is that they say, don't focus too much on losses, focus more on opportunities that you may get.
И чем быстрее бизнес начнет фокусироваться на возможностях, которые открываются в момент карантина, пандемии, тем быстрее начинаются какие-то изменения.
And I believe that the sooner the businesses will start focusing on opportunities other than on losses and crises and bankruptcy, the faster we'll start having changes.
И ну, вот Олег сказал, что есть бизнесы, которые начинались и были точно не готовы к коронавирусу, и их бизнес приостановился. Но я видел даже среди своих компаний много компаний, которые вынужденно смогли перестроиться.
So in the beginning, Oleg Maltsev mentioned that there were certain businesses during this pandemic that were not capable of keeping up their activities, so they had to shut down. I mean, this is some part of the businesses. And Vyacheslav is saying that he himself nevertheless saw several businesses that were able to adjust quickly enough.
Поэтому уже по ситуации сейчас в группах компаний своих мы сложили какие-то новые правила, как себя нужно вести во время таких кризисов.
And at the moment, in the group of our companies, we have outlined a list of rules as how we should behave during this crisis.
Когда начинается такая ситуация, во-первых, это мы увидели и в мире, каждая компания начинает бороться сама за себя. То есть начинает срабатывать принцип самурая. Когда самураи идут на войну, то они воюют как каждый сам за себя. То есть они не рассчитывают, что за спиной кто-то их спину прикрывает. И поэтому, когда начался карантин, все предприятия стали как каждый сам за себя, в принципе, как и страны.
So what this pandemic situation has demonstrated to us is that currently every business is fighting for itself only. They are behaving like samurais. For instance, when a samurai goes to war, he fights only for himself. He doesn't rely on anybody. And that's how not only companies are behaving right now, but even countries during this crisis period. They have to think only about themselves.
Только через какой-то промежуток времени люди начинают думать снова об объединении. И поэтому вначале не надо пытаться людей сразу, я имею в виду, как несколько компаний пытаться объединить.
And so only after a certain period, it is possible when people will start uniting. When I say people, I mean business players.
В этот момент очень важно исключить ошибки, потому что в момент кризиса или карантинов ошибки – это очень дорогое удовольствие. И здесь нужно пересмотреть свое окружение деловых партнеров и клиентов, подставить их под, скажем так, оценить их заново.
So during this transition period, I think it is very crucial to exclude any kind of mistakes, because a mistake is a very expensive treat in this situation. So as a businessman, I believe that we should reconsider our environment, we should reconsider our partners and who our clients are.
Я думаю, что после кризиса, я предполагаю, что работа в режиме онлайн очень сильно поменяет вообще корпоративную культуру и работу компаний. Я предполагаю, что 30% персонала не вернутся в офис и будут эффективно работать удаленно.
I believe that online regime of working is going to influence businesses a lot, because this is going to influence also the corporate culture. And I believe that about 30% of workers are not going to return to their physical workplaces. However, they will keep on effective functioning even at their own places.
Я думаю, что увеличится компании во время коронавируса поняли, что все, у тех, кого весь бизнес настроен на офлайн, им придется перестраиваться на офлайн.
Те, которые были в офлайне, им нужно в онлайн перестраиваться.
Да.
And I believe that many businesses that were functioning in offline regime before the coronavirus, they didn't understand that now they have to work towards working in online sphere. They have to adjust to that.
Также я думаю, что будет среди, Олег сказал, что давно уже была эта фраза «кадры решают все». Но я думаю, что у кадров, которые в дальнейшем, очень важным будет новый навык, который будет цениться не менее, чем профессионализм, это стрессоустойчивость сотрудников.
So Oleg Maltsev has mentioned a well-known phrase that personnel or staff, they decide practically everything. I also believe that not only professionalism should be a valuable asset, but also the stress resilience of every person.
И я для себя уже так вывожу закономерность, что достаточно всех сотрудников один раз в неделю собирать в режиме онлайн и один раз делать в режиме офлайн. И это, в принципе, может быть достаточным для режима поддержания компании в полностью ресурсном состоянии работоспособной.
I think that in order for the company to keep functioning, it would be enough to have one online meeting per week and one offline meeting per week.
Это говорит только о том, что эти изменения, в принципе, уже начаты, и они только будут продолжаться. Мы должны научить максимально быть эффективными наших сотрудников работать в режиме онлайн в будущем.
So drastical changes are already, taking place, and I think that for the future we have to teach our employees on how to successfully work in online regime.
И максимальная автоматизация всех процессов, которые возможны, это всевозможные боты, рассылки, это то, что еще больше увеличивает зависимость от человеческого фактора.
And also I should add that we should maximally automatize all of the processes that are possible to do so, because in such a case we would less depend on human factor.
Вообще, я думаю...
I'm sorry for the interruption. I hate doing this, but unfortunately we are breaking the limit of the speech. Господин Лысенко, я попрошу вас коротко в течение минуты завершить, подвести итог вашего выступления.
Да, спасибо. Вообще, я считаю, что будущее за молодежью, потому что она достаточно быстро приспосабливается ко всем новым условиям, и для нее вот эти вот кризисы — это только возможности. Поэтому нам нужно смотреть на молодежь и самим быть такими очень flexible к изменениям. Спасибо.
I think that younger generation is our future, and since I believe that they can adjust really quickly in such a situation, and that any crisis is seen by them as a possibility, I think that we also have to be more like younger generations. I mean, we have to be more flexible as they are. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your speech, Vyacheslav Lysenko. And by this moment, please let me give the floor to our expert, Konstantina Slobodinyuk. You're welcome.
Я очень рад всех видеть, и я считаю, что это большая честь для меня оказаться в столь авторитетной компании ученых и экспертов и практикующих бизнесменов.
It is an honor to be a part of this discussion panel, and I'm very honored to be in the circle of such authoritative and distinguished experts and academicians and businessmen.
Я очень благодарен за то, что организаторы нашли возможность создать такую панель международного диалога экспертного.
And I'm very grateful to organizers that they found a possibility of creating such an international conference with a dialogue.
Знаете, я хотел бы начать с того, что я горжусь, что я являюсь воспитанником доктора Олега Мальцева.
And I would like to start with telling that I'm very proud to be a mentee of Dr. Maltsev.
Дело в том, что мы никогда с Олегом Викторовичем не договоримся, о чем мы будем говорить.
And one thing which is very peculiar is that we never agree beforehand with Dr. Maltsev what are we going to be speaking about. We never know.
И поэтому по такую концепцию интеграции науки в бизнесе я лишь продолжу.
And since Dr. Maltsev mentioned about integration of science into business, this idea, I mean, I favor this idea very much, so I would like to just continue that idea on.
Что, на мой взгляд, выйдет на передний план. То есть, когда мы говорим слово «наука», это обобщение. Я считаю, что речь идет в первую очередь о прикладной науке.
And I should point out that when we say science, it's a generalization. So when we say that science has to go forward, that businessmen should pay attention to science, in the first place, they have to pay attention to apply to the practical science.
К сожалению, в академической науке сейчас очень много симуляций и погоня за статусами самих ученых. Они мало думают о людях, они больше думают о себе.
And unfortunately, in modern academia, it is full of simulations. And most, not all, but most of the modern scientists, they are pursuing different statuses and etc. that are just for themselves, for their own sake.
Я приведу несколько примеров прикладных, полезных вещей, чтобы всем было понятно, о чем речь.
And I will provide several simple examples, the practical ones, so that everybody understands what I'm speaking about.
Сколько людей, бизнесменов, держали в руках книгу Джеффри Брайана Уэста «Масштаб»?
So my first rhetorical question is that how many businessmen all over the world did read Dr. Geoffrey West's book, which is called Scale, the Universal Laws of Growth, Innovation, Sustainability, and the Pace of Life in Organisms, Cities, Economies, and Companies?
Я уверен, что очень малое количество людей. Я имею в виду бизнесменов конкретно.
I'm sure that very few businessmen did actually read that book.
И это касается не только постсоветского пространства, я думаю, что это касается всего мира в целом.
And in my viewpoint, I think this doesn't relate only to former USSR sphere, but generally.
При этом бизнесмены постоянно используют такое понятие, как тиражирование.
And at the same time, meanwhile, businessmen, they always use such a notion as circulation or duplication.
Но я не встречал ни одного бизнесмена, который может начертить модель тиражирования и объяснить ее эффективность.
However, I have never met a businessman that would be capable of drawing and explaining of how that model works.
Но при этом я наблюдал и наблюдаю каждый день, как на протяжении последних 4 месяцев происходит исследование на основе книги Джеффри Уэста «Масштаб» в институте под руководством Олега Викторовича Мальцева.
And I have been observing as a mentee of Dr. Maltsev how in the course of 4 months, there are researches are going on at the institute on the book of Dr. Geoffrey West, which is called Scale.
И поверьте, там множество выводов, которые уже внедряются в разные бизнесы, партнеров, свои бизнесы. И все это на основе работы над научным трудом Джеффри Уэста.
And believe me that this painstaking work, it has its results. I mean, there are a lot of applied very practical conclusions based on that book. And some of our partners and some organizations are already applying certain principles.
И поэтому я, уж извините, выступаю с инициативой, обращаюсь к доктору Мальцеву и к доктору Джеффри Уэсту, чтобы они как-то, может быть, скооперировались и написали книгу тиражирования. То есть масштаб уже есть, чтобы появилась книга тиражирования. Бизнесмены будут целовать вас в руки.
Therefore, I think it is necessary for me to step in with an initiative. So I would like to kindly ask Dr. Geoffrey West and Dr. Maltsev, if that's possible, would you mind maybe cooperating together and writing a text about circulation or duplication, since there is already a book about the scaling, but there's no book on circulation?
Приведу еще один пример.
And I would like to provide one more example.
Если бы бизнесмены изучили труды французского социолога Жана Бодрияра,
If businessmen did study the works of French thinker Jean Baudrillard,
которого по праву называют пророком Европы, последним пророком Европы,
who is justly titled as the last prophet of Europe,
то есть если бизнесмены знали, что там написано, а у него много работы, то они бы не совершали массы глупостей, которые они совершают до сих пор.
so Jean Baudrillard has written more than 50 books, and if businessmen did actually take their time and read those pieces, they would have never committed those gross mistakes that they are doing every single day.
Я приведу пример.
And I'll provide an example.
Более 30 лет назад Жан Бодрияр написал о том, что деловая репутация превратилась в товар.
And the example is as follows. Jean Baudrillard, 30 years ago, he wrote that business reputation become a good which can be bought.
И после этого предприятия взяли на себя несвойственные функции банковской системы.
And afterwards, enterprises took a function which is not relevant, which is not natural for them, which is banking system.
Они стали кредитоваться за счет потребителей.
And it became possible for them to run the credit business at the expense of consumers.
Посмотрите, что произошло.
And now everybody can see what has happened.
Компания Люфтганза.
For instance, Lufthansa organization.
Фотоаппараты Hasselblad.
Hasselblad photo cameras.
Кто бы мог подумать, что Люфтганза еще полгода назад, кто бы мог подумать, что Люфтганза будет находиться на грани банкротства сегодня?
Several months ago, who would even think that German Lufthansa would be on the brink of bankruptcy?
Эти примеры показывают, что пока у бизнеса не будет науки в некой основе, да, то они будут продолжать экспериментировать на себе и на всех вокруг, и будет в состоянии агонии находиться.
And these examples, they demonstrate that unless businesses have scientific approach, they will keep on experimenting on themselves and experimenting with other people and creating a mess in this world.
То есть принцип «вижу цель и не вижу препятствий», и деньги любой ценой, это должно остаться прошлым, далеким.
And certainly the principle of earning money, at any rate, it doesn't matter what, but if people have only money as their goal, this principle should be the story of the past. We should move to another way of doing this.
И, соответственно, три главных врага бизнеса, на мой взгляд, выглядят следующим образом.
And I think there are three enemies of businesses.
Первое – это невежество.
So the first one is ignorance.
Невежество самих руководителей бизнесменов, в первую очередь.
And ignorance of the business owners in the first place.
Отсутствие эффективных консультантов.
Second is the fact that they don't have effective consultant.
И отсутствие научного подхода.
And third enemy is the absence of scientific approach.
При этом в бизнесе, конечно же, придется использовать междисциплинарный подход.
Meanwhile, businesses will have to apply multidisciplinary approach.
Иначе бизнес превратится в русскую рулетку. Спасибо за внимание.
Otherwise, businesses are going to become a Russian roulette. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. So by this moment, let me please ask you to switch to our second department of the discussion. And the second question for the discussion is as follows. How to make governments abide by the Constitution and not break the law in times of global threats? How to make the country's economy and business environment independent from an ineffective government? So by this moment, let me please give the floor to Professor Geoffrey Brian West. You're welcome.
Thank you. Well, this is, let's see, am I unmuted? Yes. This is this is not part of my expertise, that's for sure. That is because it's a huge question, obviously, because I think we have to agree that we need government, we need law, we need constraints, but we also need a sense of freedom and freedom of action, freedom for markets to work, for entrepreneurship to develop, and so on. But in a way, going back to some of the conversation we had before, in a way that has a human dimension to it. That and I use the phrase of social responsibility that companies now need to make as part of their culture, not just the brute idea of making a profit, which is obviously crucially important, otherwise the company dies, but equally important is now social responsibility and their role in being able to play that. And we see that, of course, it's come much more to the fore in recent years because of the development of the internet and of social media, and especially companies like Facebook and Google, which are in a strange way playing the role, as I mentioned earlier, really the government's played, because they are in some ways setting the style. I mean, they're providing a platform, but they're also setting a style and a modality for social interaction, for the structure of social networks, and they themselves are in that governmental role, are controlling flows and what is allowed and what is not allowed, and so on. And so we're getting this integration and confusion much more than we had in the past, I think, between culture, social networking, government controls, and companies. Now, so on the side of why you need government involved in business, if you look at it from that viewpoint, which is something that developed in the 19th and 20th century, that was done because sort of brute capitalism, in the sort of naive 19th century version of it, where it develops into exploitation, you needed governments to intervene at some stage so that by the time you came to the 20th century, we didn't have 9-year-old boys going down working in coal mines. So, that's an extreme example. So you need some kind of government control. On the other hand, when governments interfere with the free flow of information, the ability for people with ideas and innovation to promote them in the marketplace, I think that's the tension. And it now becomes even more, not just because of the internet, but as a secondary effect of the internet. The thing we already heard earlier is that business is now obviously global. So Facebook and Google, I'm very US-centric because I know that best, transcend national boundaries. And it's extremely difficult then for governments to control them anyway. So I don't think there's any simple answers to this. What we don't want is the extreme that developed. I was reading just this morning, I don't know where did I put it? You know, I'll read it to you because bear with me 1 minute, that I saw this morning from Nazi Germany, which is the most extreme example, of course, of control. Let me see if I can find it. Here we are. This was a statement made by the, basically the head of the Supreme Court, the People's Court, the Deutsches Court in Germany, the Volkscourt, I think, in Germany. And here's what he said during the Nazi period: the People's Court will always endeavor to judge as it believes you, my Führer, would judge the case yourself. So this is, of course, the extreme example of the state controlling the law and not allowing businesses to flourish. And of course, Nazi Germany was doing that, did control, and of course, Soviet Russia was not so different. And the blossoming of China, of course, and its extraordinary advances that it's made in the last 20 years has come about because it started to loosen those kinds of controls that inhibited its progress for the previous 50, if not 200 years, that it loosened those controls, allowing ideas to develop and so forth. And so there's this, I don't have any simple solutions for either on the one hand businesses or for governments to do it. I see it as a continuing organic process that evolves between the tension between the two. And the important thing is that governments recognize the importance of entrepreneurship and the role of businesses in engendering the quality and standard of living of people. And in the past, there was sort of this naive assumption, the kind of, what was it, Adam Smith, the invisible hand, that somehow if you had a totally free market, you would optimize the system and everything would be great. That obviously let itself open to exploitation and abuse. On the other hand, total control, a la Soviet Union or China up until recently, stifles innovation and ideas. So it's incumbent upon all sides to recognize that there is a continuous organic evolutionary process giving rise to what will benefit the majority of people. And just to go back to what I said earlier, one of the developments that has given me a little glimmer of hope has been the development of the idea of social responsibility within the business community. And in answer to Konstantin's question, has any business leaders read my book? Well, I don't know the answer to that. But I will say many business leaders running some of the major companies whose names I cannot mention, that are internationally known and so on, have read my book. And they have talked to me about it. And I would say that one of the things that has, as I say, given me hope is that they recognize that they play a role beyond just making profits for their shareholders. And the two things that I think they recognize is, one, that they need to create a decent living for their employees, the working conditions, and we discussed earlier, that will change because of the pandemic, but I think might even change in a positive way for those that are able to maintain their jobs. We have a whole discussion yet about those that are not able to, but also that they recognize that they need to play a central role in collaboration with governments to create better standards and quality of life. So I think the days of hard-nosed capitalism of, Rockefeller and Carnegie and so on, those days are over, and we do have something new developing. Whether it will bring the kind of society we all want, in the kind of liberal democratic society with healthcare, decrease of inequality, and caring of people, is yet to be seen. So thank you. I've talked too long anyway.
Thank you so much, Professor West. And by this moment, let me please give the floor to Dr. Oleg Maltsev. You're welcome.
Спасибо огромное, что дали слово.
Thank you very much for giving me the word.
Я вначале хочу пояснить, что я имел в виду, когда я говорил, какие-то бизнесы в карантин развивались, какие-то бизнесы остановились в своем развитии или были поставлены на грань банкротства.
And so first I would like to clarify myself when I have said in my first answer that some businesses did stop their development and were about to become bankrupt, and some of them developed and continued their activity.
Представьте себе, что 10 лет назад какой-то бизнесмен решил открыть бизнес, связанный с доставкой.
Just imagine a situation that, let's say 10 years ago, a businessman opened a new business that was serving food, giving the food from door to door.
Совершенно неважно, с какой доставкой.
And it doesn't mean what type of asset they were delivering.
Да, понятное дело, в карантин эти бизнесы прогрессировали.
And certainly this type of businesses during quarantine, they did progress, they did develop even more.
Понятно, когда все закрыто, кто-то должен доставлять продукты, еще что-то.
Because when everything is closed, somebody has to deliver the goods, the food, and etc.
Особенно на международном уровне.
Especially on the international level.
Когда границы государств закрыты, а почта работает.
When the borders of the countries are closed.
Алло. Коннекей? Коннекей? Слышишь меня, да?
Да, сейчас слышу, да.
Так вот, прошу прощения за технические неполадки. Так вот, обратите внимание, что, например, когда остановились полеты Люфтганзы, безусловно, она стала на грани банкротства.
So please pay attention when the Lufthansa flights, when they stopped their flights, certainly the situation was not that good for them.
То есть это два примера, которые вам помогут понять, что я имел в виду в прошлой сессии.
And these are two simple examples. The delivery service and the Lufthansa example are clear examples of what I have meant in my previous talk.
Окей, теперь отвечаю на два вопроса, которые поставлены администратором.
Now I'm replying to two questions that were set on this panel.
Как запретить государству нарушать законы? Никак.
So how you can force governments to not trespass the law? And the answer is you cannot do that. You cannot force them.
У нас существует парадокс, я говорил уже в предыдущих панелях, что чем демократичнее государство, тем оно слабее в любой экстремальной ситуации. Коннекей, ты меня слышишь? Коннекей, ты меня слышишь? Коннекей, ты меня слышишь?
Похоже, нет.
So we have spoken before that.
Что такое?
So by this, let me please translate for a while until we finish the connection. We manage the connection, okay? So previously, Dr. Maltsev says we were speaking about the fact we face a certain paradox. The paradox is as follows: the more democratic the country is, the less prepared it is to, let me say, manage and take certain control actions in order to deal with the consequences of the crisis.
Окей. И обратите внимание, что, в общем-то, правительства государств, они ведут себя как маленькие дети демократических государств в этой ситуации всегда.
And please pay attention that usually in such kind of situations in democratic countries, the leaders of those states, they start behaving like small kids.
Окей. И поэтому, по сути своей, как бы надеяться на государство, что оно не будет нарушать законы, на то, что оно будет как-то помогать бизнесу, это совершенно бестолковое занятие.
And if you rely on that the governments would not basically contradict to their constitutions, if they would be helping businesses, there's no point in relying on government when it comes to this.
Обратите внимание, что на сегодняшний день нет ни одного государства, которое не нарушило Конституцию, не нарушило основные права граждан и не нарушило все мыслимые и немыслимые уголовные статьи своего же собственного кодекса, который утвердил их же парламент.
So please pay attention that during this current pandemic, there was not even one single state that did not trespass, that did not violate its own constitution, the human rights and freedoms, and its statutes that it had actually set by itself, the government itself.
То есть пример, который я вам сейчас хочу привести, это пример, связанный с Украиной.
And I would like to give an example that happened in Ukraine.
Он меня особенно развлек.
And it's, it was very ridiculous for me.
То есть, по сути своей, в последнем постановлении Кабинет министров Украины написал следующее.
So in the last official letter of the Cabinet of Ministers, they have stated the following.
Он написал, что он с сегодняшнего дня при послаблении карантина разрешает работать адвокатам, средствам массовой информации и всем остальным учреждениям, которые, в общем-то, охраняются законом, их деятельность в любой ситуации, даже во время войны.
And that letter of Cabinet of Ministers, it said that from today on, since we are loosening a little bit of the measures of the quarantine, we are allowing to work for the attorneys' offices, for the mass medias, and etc. So the letter said that these entities would be always under protection of government, even during the wartime.
Вот представьте себе, безусловно, в Украине и средства массовой информации работали, и адвокаты работали, и нотариусы работали все время карантина.
And certainly, even during the quarantine, attorney offices and mass medias and prosecutor officers, they were working at all times. They didn't stop.
Вот, представьте себе, какого уровня интеллекта нужно обладать для того, чтобы 3 статьи Уголовного кодекса написать себе в одном постановлении Кабинета министров Украины.
So now, just imagine what should be the level of intellectual preparedness in the state, in the Cabinet of Ministers, in order to write that type of letter, which already making them a person who trespassed the criminal law.
То есть, по сути своей, действительно, никакие права в этом случае не нарушались. То есть, работали и адвокаты, и средства массовой информации работали, как хотели во время карантина, и нотариусы работали, но написали такое, что вот зачем, никто не может ответить на этот вопрос до сегодняшнего дня.
So, as I've said, during quarantine, attorney offices and media, they were working perfectly. They were working just the way they wanted to. And so nobody does understand why they have written such an official letter, the Cabinet of Ministers. So this is almost like a joke situation.
Но если вы посмотрите на Германию сейчас, на Францию, на Испанию, на Соединенные Штаты Америки, вы и вникните в то, что пишут они, поверьте, у них чудаков не меньше.
And if you take a look at the official papers released by government in Germany, in France, in Spain, in the US, and in other countries, believe me, one will find a lot of ridiculous statements over there as well.
То есть, по сути, своей Украина просто не исключение.
I mean, Ukraine is not an exception.
Переходя к второму вопросу, как бы я думаю так, как сделать так, чтобы предприятие было независимым от государства. Знаете, когда ко мне приходит бизнесмен и просит его проконсультировать, я ему всегда рекомендую одну и ту же вещь.
So coming to the next question, what shall be done to make businesses independent? So when people come to me for a consultation, when businessmen come to me, I tell them one simple thing.
Заведите себе хобби.
I always tell them, why don't you find a hobby for yourself?
В виде изучения науки криминология.
And that hobby would be studying the science which is termed criminology.
Да, я вчера говорил, когда мы говорили с криминологами о том, что преступная организация – это самые устойчивые организации в мире, которые только существуют.
On yesterday's panels, we were discussing the topic of criminal organizations and their role in the post-pandemic world. We mentioned that criminal organizations and criminality as such is the most resilient entity in this type of crises.
Вам совершенно не обязательно становиться преступниками.
And while having that kind of hobby, you don't have to become a criminal, certainly.
Но изучить опыт этих организаций, это было бы очень полезно.
But it would not harm to closely study the experience and history of those organizations.
Да. И по сути своей, как бы, это хобби, оно может вам дать огромное количество бизнес-идей.
And that hobby, as we have termed it, it may give you a large amount of different business ideas.
Второе, что я бы порекомендовал, это все-таки изучить опыт этого карантина, какие предприятия в таких условиях развивались, а какие предприятия все-таки стали на грань банкротства.
And second recommendation that I would give is to study what has happened during this crisis. Which companies did continue their activities successfully and which ones did not?
Третье, на что бы я как бы обратил внимание, это что нужно, в общем-то, расширять сферу деятельности своих как бы предприятий. То есть не замыкаться в одной отрасли, а думать о том, что, в общем-то, в дальнейшем, возможно, нужно менять и структуру, и форму инвестиций, инвестиционного пакета предприятий по причине того, что мир реально после пандемии изменится.
And third recommendation would be to expand the areas of activity of this or that business and not to focus only on one area. Because after the pandemic, things are going to change for sure. And it might become even necessary to restructure the way investments are done.
И, вероятнее всего, предприятиям нужно думать о новых видах деятельности.
Most probably, companies has to seriously consider new types of activities.
И я просто подразумеваю, что онлайн-деятельность уже как бы присутствует у как бы предприятия, то есть они как-то могут уже работать с онлайном, потому что действительно на Украине карантин показал, что не все предприятия готовы к онлайну.
And when I was giving this three main points, I was keeping in mind that these companies already have online mode of working as well in their workplaces. However, in the case of Ukraine, I should admit that there are some companies that actually did struggle because they are not used to online regime of carrying their activity.
И я думаю, что бизнесменам необходимо подумать о неких резервных фондах, как бы, потому что, в общем-то, весь все деньги в обороте, как бы, это очень хорошо, но вот в таких ситуациях здесь возникают масса проблем именно связанных с платежами, и вот какой-то резерв все-таки у предприятия должен существовать.
And also, I would like to add that businessmen should carefully consider having a reliable reserve fund because there are a lot of problems emerging in this situation that is related to payments. So having this reliable reserve fund is necessary.
Спасибо огромное за внимание.
Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maltsev. So by this moment, please let me give the floor to Professor Athina Karatzogianni. You're welcome.
Hi, yes, thank you. So, we're at the second question, how to make government sort of keep to its government function and not take over the world, I suppose. Yeah, I think I have been actually very worried about this. And I think that when we had our first panel, I was talking about surveillance and censorship, securitization, that basically what seems to be happening is that there are, unfortunately, authoritarian governments that have taken to the crackdown or the lockdown to have a crackdown on certain parts of the population that might be, dissidents. So there have been examples in Latin America, in Southeast Asia, governments that already have a truly appalling record of human rights. And I'm talking, for example, places like the Philippines, where you have the war on drugs that saw the killing of activists and dissidents. I think that there has to be an organized resistance in cases where governments become overzealous and use the pandemic as a justification register and use this to legitimize policing that is disproportionate, that is targeting Black, Asian minorities. In this country, for example, we know that there were more fines for certain parts of the population than others. The statistics that show that the virus has hit the BAME communities, Black, Asian minority, ethnic minorities here in the UK harder, and in other countries as well. This is the case, like the US. So it seems to me, in regard to safeguarding the impact of the virus on certain communities has not been to the expected standard, let's say, from governments. Is actually safeguarding certain vulnerable groups and minorities in the population. I think also in terms of the tracing apps, here, for instance, how contracts have been dealt with and which are the companies that are chosen to work with. We have the example of Palantir and how contracts are given to private tech companies by the government and who they're collaborating with. It seems to me that there is not enough transparency in how this political economy of the surveillance and tracing of apps is actually working in quite a few countries, and often you see the same people, for instance, that were working with Vote Leave or during the Brexit, the same companies that are in lack for another expression, in bed with the historic government, this conservative government, getting contracts for these COVID-related surveillance and tracing applications. And this securitization that is being affected in the public space in the UK, of who is targeting, who is being affected by these measures, who is sent to work. So suddenly you have anyone that can work should go to work, and anyone that can work from home stay at home. And you can see that this has an impact on certain type of work. right? And these were who is in the key workers that always were the ones that were projected as the least useful or skilled, that we didn't want in this country, suddenly become vital to how this country operates as well. So there is also how health workers have been protected or not protected. For example, how temporary precarious workers have lost their job, and how the government in a way has in certain countries been able to put people on furlough through businesses. Certain sectors like the aviation industries have been helped. Other sectors like the universities have not been supported as well. So I think that we have in different countries, different things happen. It's just the bottom line is that we cannot have a situation where the crisis, the COVID crisis, is used to accelerate inequality and to harm vulnerable or to target communities due to race or gender or other psychological difference or any other differences. And I think that it is important that there is an organization of resisting, and we can see in the digital surveillance realm that there are organizations resisting the choices that certain governments have made. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Professor. So the discussion will continue. Vyacheslav Lysenko, you're welcome.
Спасибо. Ну, я, наверное, разделю мнение с Олегом. Я не знаю, как сделать, чтобы заставить политиков соблюдать Конституцию. Я не знаю, и таких примеров в крайнем случае точно не видел. Поэтому, скорее всего, наверное, если говорить про Украину, то мы здесь живем по принципу «не помогайте бизнесу, а просто хотя бы не мешайте». И мы уже будем этому рады. И по поводу, как, наверное, перейду ко второй части, это как сделать... Окей.
So when it comes to breaking the constitution and not following the laws of the country, I cannot say much on this topic. But when it comes to Ukraine, well, I think overall in this country, businesses are not supported. And so we are living with the principle that don't make things hard for us. And if you don't interfere with business, we would be happy with that. I mean, this is an approach in Ukraine.
Ну, это вот вопрос, как сделать компанию независимой от государства. Но здесь, ну, в моем понимании, тоже задача достаточно трудная, потому что у нас государство – это субъект, а бизнес – это объект.
When it comes to the question of how to make companies independent from government, I think this is quite a difficult question because when we speak about the government, that would be a subject, and when we speak about the business, that would be an object.
Ну и вообще независимость бизнеса от государства, я думаю, в Украине и в Америке это два совершенно разных вопроса.
And certainly, I think that independence of business from government in Ukraine, it would be one situation, and in the US, it would be completely different case.
Поэтому в Украине мы для того, чтобы быть независимым, мы понимаем, где есть точки пересечения между государством и бизнесом, и стараемся разработать стратегию поведения бизнеса в этих точках пересечения.
As for the Ukraine, we do understand that to a certain extent, businesses are independent, but there are certain intersection points where intersection points with the government. And so what businesses are doing, they're trying to develop a strategy of how business should behave in this condition.
Ну и чем меньше таких пересечений между государством и бизнесом, тем, наверное, это предприятие не независимей, а устойчивей.
And the less there are intersection points between businesses and government, I think the more the business would be stable. I would not say independent, but I would say it is more stable.
И здесь, здесь, наверное, хороший способ это создать международную компанию с активами и точками прибыли в других странах.
And I believe that in this case, it would be wise to create an international company with assets that would have incomes coming in different countries.
Но здесь мы не избегаем зависимости от одного государства, мы просто теперь мы становимся зависимыми от многих государств, где ведем бизнес.
But it doesn't mean that we become independent from the government. It just means that we become dependent from many other governments.
Поэтому здесь это просто как бизнес, который стоит на нескольких ножках, он более устойчивый.
However, it is more stable because it is about a business which has different fulcrum points in different places.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Thank you. And by this, please let me give the floor to our expert, Konstantina Slobodnyuk.
Спасибо большое, что дали слово.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Было бы, наверное, странно, если бы я противоречил словам академика Мальцева.
I think it would be strange if my words would contradict to the words of academician Oleg Maltsev.
Было бы странно, если бы слова противоречили практикующему бизнесмену Вячеславу Лысенко.
And it would be strange if my words would be contradictory to a practicing businessman Vyacheslav Lysenko.
Ну и было бы странно, если противоречило тому, что говорят уважаемые профессора Athina Karatzogianni и Geoffrey West.
And certainly it would be also strange if my words would contradict to distinguished professors as Dr. Geoffrey West and Dr. Athina Karatzogianni.
Но я набрался смелости и хотел бы вам представить определенную концепцию.
However, currently I'm brave enough to introduce a certain concept.
Знаете, как говорят специалисты, я одной ногой зайду на поле Athina Karatzogianni. Вот, и я попрошу ее внимательно выслушать, и потом мы пообщаемся.
So as specialists would say, I will try to put my one foot into the field of Dr. Athina, and I kindly ask her to pay close attention so that we can discuss this later on.
Я предлагаю рассмотреть некую концепцию, которая, конечно же, не запретит государству нарушать законы и Конституцию, но максимально усложнит эту задачу.
I would suggest considering a certain concept that would not, of course, prohibit governments to trespass the law, but it would make it very hard for them to do so.
И, как говорит мой шеф, нужно начать с некой модели.
And as my boss tells, we have to always start with a model.
Эта модель была представлена на заседании ОБСЕ в 2012 году профессором Massimo Introvigne.
And the model that I'm going to be speaking about right now was introduced by Dr. Massimo Introvigne at the meeting of OSCE in 2012.
Представьте себе пятиуровневую модель.
Imagine a certain figure that has 5 levels.
Вверху находится государство.
At the very top, we have the government.
Ниже находится уровень академической науки.
Underneath, we have academic science.
Ниже находится экспертный уровень.
Even lower than that, we have expert level.
Ниже средства массовой информации.
Then media publications.
И в самом низу блоги, социальные сети и самодельные сайты.
And at the very beneath of this figure, we have the blogs, the websites that were just self-made and are not registered.
Профессор Интровини описывал эту модель, как управляется и формируется общественное мнение.
And Dr. Massimo, by drawing this model, he explained how public opinion is shaped and how it is managed.
Обратите внимание, государство находится вверху, и, казалось бы, невозможно помешать ему.
Please pay attention that in this 5-level figure, we have the government at the top, and it may seem that nobody can interfere with its job.
Но что могло бы усложнить максимально нарушение закона, это определенная конфигурация.
However, what can make it really hard for government to trespass the law is a certain configuration.
Представьте себе международную экспертную научную структуру.
Imagine an international expert community or team,
где существуют ученые, эксперты, свои средства массовой информации и свои команды, которые обеспечивают нижний уровень.
and imagine that this committee involves scientists and experts and its own mass media publications. So basically, whole of this figure is managed by them.
Казалось бы, что подобные структуры должны существовать.
It would seem that we should have had this type of structures functioning already.
Но, к сожалению, их нет.
Unfortunately, there are no structures as such.
Они все излишне политизированы, потому что они кормятся за счет фондов и политических структур разных стран.
This type of structures, even if they exist in this type of configuration, they are too much politicized because they rely on the funds that they receive from different foundations and government financial aid.
Именно поэтому Национальная академия наук Украины просто подыгрывает правительству Украины и молчит.
And exactly for this reason, the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine, it kind of plays the game of the government and pesters it.
Средний возраст этой структуры 72 года.
And average age of this organization, the National Academy, is 72 years.
Что они могут сделать при всем уважении к возрасту?
So with all respect to the 72 years, we have to ask the question, what are they capable of?
В других странах ничем принципиально это не отличается. Единственное, что в Украине это государственная структура, а в Великобритании это частная структура.
And when we are speaking about other countries, the situation doesn't differ. It's just in Ukrainian case, it's about National Academy, but for instance, in United Kingdom, that would be a private organization.
Следующий пример – Великобритания, Imperial College.
The next example that I would like to mention is UK example with Imperial College.
Я уберу название в сторону сейчас и сакцентирую внимание на определенной группе профессора Фергюсона.
So just for the sake of the example, I would like to take off the label, the title of Imperial College to a side, but I would like to focus on the team that was led by Ferguson.
32 человека придумали прогнозы для всего мира. 16 марта опубликовали на своем сайте.
So could you imagine 32 individuals invented, made up prognosis for a whole world and set the tendency on the 16th of March.
Они сказали, что 80% населения планеты переболеет коронавирусом.
They claim that 80% of the population of this humanity are going to get infected.
В этот же день вечером, 16 марта, закрылись границы Германии.
And same day, when the report was released on 16th of March, Germany closed its borders.
Вслед за Германией закрыли в течение 2 недель границы все остальные страны Евросоюза.
And after that, in the course of 2 weeks, all countries in the European Union, taking the example of Germany, also closed their borders.
И ни одно правительство страны не взяли в руки отчет Фергюсона и не посмотрели, что он там написал.
And there was not even one single country that responsibly took the report of Ferguson team and actually looked into it.
Но это сделали мы в институте под руководством Олега Викторовича.
However, that scrutinization was done by us at the institute with the guidance of Dr. Maltsev.
Я лично проводил расследование, как журналист.
And I personally took part in the investigation of the case.
Оно было опубликовано в немецких изданиях, и, как вы понимаете, вывод очень простой – это фейк.
We published the results of the investigation in several German publications, and the conclusion that follows is very simple. That was fake one, the fake research.
То есть вот начало – это отчет Фергюсона, а вот прошло 3 месяца экономический коллапс, кризис, увольнение и все, что сейчас происходит. Но начинается все, вы видите, с чего, с науки.
So as you can see, the starting point of Ferguson report, it was 3 months ago, almost 3 months. And now we see total economic collapse. We have different crises in different spheres, but pay attention that all has started with the science, with the Ferguson team reporting.
Но давайте вернемся к смелой концепции.
But why don't we come back to that brave concept?
А если бы 16 марта независимая структура, которая включает в себя ученых, экспертов, средства массовой информации, всех остальных, остановила бы Фергюсона и поддала жесткой критике, и задала бы соответствующие вопросы на научном уровне, и, по сути, с большой долей вероятности всего бы это бы не происходило.
So let us suppose, what if on 16th of March, the team of scientists, independent experts, media publications that are independent have come together and stopped Ferguson team by asking him relevant questions. Most probably the consequences that we saw might not have happened.
Это простой пример того, как такая конфигурация может останавливать или максимально усложнять продвижение глобальных угроз в мире.
And this is a simple example of how this kind of configurations are capable of stopping or making hard for the global threats to evolve in the world.
А где же здесь бизнес?
And where is the business in this configuration?
А бизнес стоит сзади и финансирует такую структуру, потому что она помогает и решать их задачи, и в таких ситуациях максимально останавливает и создает максимальные препятствия для вот этой глупости, которая происходила на протяжении всего этого времени.
And business stands behind this configuration because it finances it. At the same time, certainly it solves its own questions, and it finances this structure that would be an obstacle for ignorance and for foolishness that we have been observing for a while.
Безусловно, это всего лишь концепция, но она основана на определенной модели и тех событиях, свидетелями которых мы с вами являлись. Спасибо большое за внимание.
Certainly, this is just a concept, and however, it is based on the model and based on the events that we have already seen. Thank you for attention.
Thank you so much to our colleagues. By this moment, let me please invite you to the third department of our discussion, and the main topic of it, the main issue, is going to be dedicated to the question adequate education. By adequate education, we mean past theories, forecasts, teachings that do not work today. And the main question is as follows: which professions and services will be highly demanded in the very near future? Where one can study and upgrade his skills and get his qualification? And what should executives and subordinates do in this situation? So by this, let me please give the floor to Professor Geoffrey Brian West. You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. Well, of course, education is key to the future. I think that's an obvious platitude. It's going through a huge struggle, I would say, at the moment, not only because of the changes that have been happening. As I said, they're accelerated by what the pandemic has done and the threats to our economic well-being. One of the problems that we've been facing is that democracy, the idea of good government and democracy, relies on of course, a well-educated, critical thinking electorate. And sadly, in many countries, including the United States, with which I'm most familiar, education has become more narrow, more superficial, and in many ways inadequate for the 21st century and the changes that have already been taking place. Obvious ones that are fundamental to all education is to instill ideas of critical thinking, to have a broad sense of what the important questions are, and to engender a rational, analytic way of thinking, however, integrated with a respect for humanities, the arts and culture. So, and I think that's, ironically, I think that whole idea began already in the 19th century, and somehow we lost it along the way into the late 20th century. So, first of all, so we need this bigger picture view of education and this idea that if we're going to progress and get the kinds of governments and the kinds of businesses, the kinds of ideas that are going to sustain the planet and continue with the kind of quality and standard of life that we have, and to raise the entire planet in those terms, education plays a crucial role. But there are forces acting against it. And one of those forces, ironically, is, of course, the role of the internet. Because the internet, although it gives rise to the potential of having exposure to a broad educational process, especially now more of the MOOCs, the idea that you can see courses on the web and so on. Nevertheless, the problem with it is that you can sort of pick and choose those that only suit your purposes. And I think this is a huge issue that is facing society in general, but is certainly one that is now beginning to work its way into our educational system. But obviously, more specifically, clearly, we need to have an electorate that is more scientifically literate. Most countries are run by politicians that have no literacy in science, and it's kind of ironic. The society that we live in and all the marvelous things that we have, all the benefits that we have their origins in one way or another from science and technology, engineering, and so on. And yet people that are making the decisions are basically scientifically illiterate. And it's truly extraordinary. And we've seen it very much in this pandemic is a marvelous example of it. So whatever you think of Ferguson and the paper that was written, we did not have, in terms of our leadership, critical thinking able to address that question, nor did we have processes in place that come out of our education to deal with it. So clearly we need to engender a much broader and deeper scientific thinking across all citizens. And furthermore, so it's not just having that literacy in terms of understanding details and techniques, but understanding the conceptual framework of what science is, what a scientific argument is, what a rational argument is, how to analyze a problem, how to think independently about a problem, that whole idea of critical thinking. But it needs to be integrated with what are the value systems that we believe in, namely that we would like to, at least I put in my own ideas here, but I think most of us would agree, we'd like to have some recognition of what facts are, what truth is, how to verify them, and so on. And the idea of caring for humanity, caring for others, and so forth. So all of these things have to be put into the educational system, and I feel that, at least in the United States, And in other countries with which I'm familiar, this has been more and more lost. The other thing that has happened, and there's a tension here between wanting to focus in order to have the technical ability to understand some of these issues, but at the same time to have this very broad view of what society is. What does it mean to be part of a society? What does it mean to be part of a community? What does it mean to be part of even the global community? So to have a much bigger picture version of how all of the aspects of life and all of the various aspects of knowledge and of culture are actually all interrelated. And so moving away from being highly focused towards a much more holistic, interdisciplinary kind of vision. And there's a tension there, and the struggle that we're going to have in the 21st century is to integrate those in a way that we have a citizenry that can respect each other and can understand the kinds of processes that are going on and make informed decisions about their future and the future of their city, their country, their state, and the globe. So, thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor West. So by this, let me please give the floor to Dr. Oleg Maltsev.
Спасибо большое, что дали мне слово.
Thank you for giving me the floor.
Меня всегда удивляла очень интересная вещь до определенного момента. Почему наши правительства ходят советоваться к странным ученым и не ходят советоваться к великим ученым?
Up until certain point, I was always thrilled how our governments do always consult with strange, let's say, scientists and never consult the great ones.
Я, видимо, немного упустил эту проблематику из своего внимания там лет 10 назад, пока Георгий Геренцер в Германии не написал как бы книгу, которая называется о консультантах, которые консультируют, ученых, которые консультируют правительство. Вот как выглядит эта книга, я ее показывал на прошлый раз.
So 10 years ago, probably I didn't pay attention too much to this problem until the moment when I read the book by Georg Gerenzer, the German scientist who wrote the book. The cover of it I'm showing right now. It's about the consultants of scientists that consult governments.
И когда я прочитал книгу Георга Геренцера, а он для меня, как бы, знаете, вот как Эйнштейн в физике, так Георг Геренцер — это Эйнштейн в психологии.
So Georg Gerenzer, for me, he's like an Einstein, but not in physics or mathematics, but in psychology.
Так вот, знаете, как этот человек написал достаточное количество трудов, и я, в общем-то, удивляюсь всегда, почему бизнесмены никогда не обращают на таких людей внимания.
So he is an author of a decent number of books, and I'm always surprised why businessmen do not pay attention to this kind of works.
Потому что его основная, как бы, вид деятельности — это принятие человеческих решений.
Because the main expertise of Georg Gerenzer is how people make decisions.
И, в общем-то, это то, что делает бизнесмен каждый день с утра до вечера.
And a businessman makes decisions every single day, many times.
Я всегда удивлялся, почему они читают всякого Брайана Трейси сумасшедшего и прочих там американских кумиров, и почему они не читают Георга Геренцера.
I was always perplexed why businessmen would read somebody like Brian Tracy and other mainstream self-help speakers and not Georg Gerenzer, for instance.
И, первую причину я для себя нашел, потому что он пишет на немецком языке, и у нас существует некий языковой барьер.
The first reason why they do not pay attention to him, I found out it is a language barrier, because most of his works are written in German.
И я когда-то проводил, знаете, семинар по его книге, который называется «Принятие интуитивных решений».
And there was one moment when I conducted a seminar, which was dedicated to the topic of intuitive decision making.
Я сравнивал наших великих академиков Яковлева и Попова, которые занимались этой же проблематикой в 30-х, 20-х, до 80-х годов, и сравнивал исследования Георга Геренцера.
And on that meeting, I was comparing the greatest scientists whose names are Yakovlev and Popov that conducted science in 30s, 40s, up until 80s. And I conducted their research with Georg Gerencer because they were researching the same topic.
И эти исследования не противоречат друг другу.
And surprisingly, the research results of these scientists did not contradict each other.
Но ни один бизнесмен не знает этих фамилий.
But no businessman knows these names. Nobody is interested.
Они ходят консультироваться к каким-то странным людям, которые им, вероятно, нравятся.
Because usually people go and ask for a consultation from people that they like.
Они же такие позитивные, мотивированные, понимаете?
Because so many people are now so positive and so motivated.
И не сильно напрягают их мозги.
And they don't want to really think hard. They don't want to make themselves work harder.
И после этого эти же бизнесмены становятся политиками.
And afterwards, these kinds of businessmen, they become politicians.
Да, в Украине это вообще национальный спорт.
In Ukraine, it can be said that this is a national sport of becoming a businessman and then becoming a politician.
И вы же прекрасно понимаете, как он консультировался в бизнес, ходил к этим, не совсем умным людям.
And as you would understand, that person, just the way he behaved while being a businessman and receiving consultations from not adequately competent people.
Точно так же, когда он становится политиком, он продолжает ходить к этим же людям.
He behaves in the same manner when he becomes a politician.
Это как раз разгадка, почему они слушают вот таких некомпетентных людей.
And this is the answer to the puzzle, why they listen to not adequately competent people.
Они привыкли слушать некомпетентных людей.
They are used to listening not competent people.
Я вот через какое-то время пришел к выводу, что некоторые бизнесмены в обществе компетентных людей чувствуют себя несколько ущербными.
And I came to a conclusion that some businessmen, they feel themselves inferior in the community of very competent people.
Да, и поэтому им они не нравятся, и поэтому они берут книгу какого-нибудь Брайана Трейси или еще какого-нибудь волшебника изумрудного города и какого-то сказочника и начинают читать, как им быть позитивными и состоятельными.
And so, because they feel inferior, they better grab a book of somebody from the mainstream. Nothing against Brian Tracy, but just as an example, and be positive and teach how to be positive, and etc.
Вы понимаете, у меня очень много времени, потому что я перечислил бы много фамилий, многим бы досталось.
If I had time, I would have provided a huge list of names, but I don't have that time.
Вот, поэтому вот эта разгадка, она очень простая. Почему у нас некомпетентные политики? Потому что когда они были бизнесменами, у них были точно такие же некомпетентные консультанты, в обществе которых они чувствуют себя более или менее прилично.
And so this is, to put it simply, this is an answer to this puzzle. Why our politicians are like this, at least in Ukraine? Because they go and consult with people. I mean, they work with people where they feel comfortable.
Вот. Это ответ на первый вопрос. А на второй вопрос, что бы я порекомендовал, я скажу так.
And this was the answer to the first question, and the answer to the second question. Here are my recommendations.
Это некая формула будущего.
I would term it as a certain formula of the future.
Думаю, что любому бизнесмену сегодня нужно, как я говорил, криминологию сделать своим хобби.
As I have said before, it would be nice to have a hobby as a criminology for a businessman.
Думаю, что ему нужно учиться исследовательской деятельности, и учиться этому очень качественно.
I believe a businessman should study the research activity and study it well.
Думаю, что нужно учиться прогнозированию.
He also has to learn how to prognose.
И думаю, что нужно учиться работать с учеными настоящими, с теми, кто действительно разбирается в проблематике, и не читать глупости, которые стоят на полках магазина.
And learn how to work, how to cooperate with real scientists and not read mainstream self-help books. Most of them do not have anything practical.
Я быстро суммирую. Вот, например, все видели, как я покупал книгу «Масштаб» собственными глазами, но многие, вот Константин Владимирович видел это и так далее. То есть я не прошел мимо книжной полки, где стояла книга «Масштаб».
So when I was buying a book in the bookstore, and for instance, Constantino, he saw that, and when I saw the book Scale by Geoffrey West, I didn't go buy. I couldn't go by.
Потому что я привык к качественному чтению.
And the reason why I paid attention to that book right away is because I'm used to high quality reading. I mean, I have a huge library dedicated to this type of things.
А для меня Джеффри Уэст — это высший пилотаж ученого.
And for me personally, I consider Geoffrey West to be the reference point, the paramount point of what scientist is.
Да. И поэтому я не могу не читать его книг.
And I should read his books.
За этим стоит огромный научный опыт и очень качественное исследование.
Because behind that book, you have many, many years of very rigid research and very high quality research.
И поэтому я каждому бизнесмену рекомендую читать именно такие книги и не читать других.
And I would recommend every businessman to read this kind of books.
Спасибо за внимание.
Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maltsev, for your speech. And by this moment, let me please ask Professor Athina Karatzogianni. You're welcome.
Hi, yes, thank you. So, so it happens that currently I'm working on a European project, a Horizon 2020 project that looks at the digital generation and digital transformations, how ICT brings digital transformation to children and youth. And I lead work in there looking at ICT and political participation for young people, particularly adolescents between the ages of 16 and 18. So we're looking at how online political behavior works, how they're engaging online politically. So in sort of more kind of common parlance, I guess, digital citizenship. So how do young people become citizens? What is the digital citizenship policy in different countries? So we're examining the UK, comparatively the UK, Greece, and Estonia. And we're looking at understanding what do young people do online, particularly in how do they engage in civil association? What kind of political participation can we see on digital networks? And I think that if you're looking at dealing with some of the issues of polarization in politics, how also disinformation occurs, digital literacy, getting young people to be aware of the online environment, internet safety issues, hate speech, trolling, disinformation, understanding what is news and what is conspiracy, what is disinformation, what is, if they're actually propagating misinformation themselves, understanding what might be fact and what might be something that someone is sharing to cause confusion or cause disturbance in a society, polarize the society, influence individuals about how to be voting in specific critical moments in the political culture of a given country. And I think this kind of understanding how people might be doing that already, how we are citizens in the world, educating young people, especially this generation that is digital. And of course, not all of this digital generation is digital, because you have the problems of countries where less women are online, for example, or there's no digital access for the poor, or certain communities do not have access. And now, because we are in a crisis where like millions of people, billions of people rather, have gone online by default to work, for leisure, for socializing. People have to juggle, and we've discussed this in the previous panels, that we have to juggle being parents and being homeschooling our children at home because they can't be at school, working at the same time. There are no public events or professional activities that are social. So we're doing a lot of entertaining each other online, for example. Right, so there are issues about how do we actually exploit this digital by default to create new digital spaces where especially younger people become citizens, but they don't become citizens by actually getting polarized by extremist propaganda, fake news, and conspiracy. And then you might ask, well, what are the values then that are acceptable? Right, so what kind of values we are looking at there in terms of democratic deliberation that is not polarized, that is not sycophantic, that is not spreading propaganda, and so on. And of course, the somebody would say, well, what is objective, or what is politically desirable here? And so how do you get a citizen to participate, to be in civil association, when they have to do so in networks that are built for enterprise association, right? So that's the paradox that I think is very important to keep in mind. So if you're on Twitter, or if you're on Facebook, in some filter bubble, some echo chamber that basically you read what you already believe, because you're like it's built around you and what you like, you follow and you become friends with people, so you keep there's no like in a way difference of opinion as well, or a civilized, or some kind of civility in how people are deliberate online. And this has to do with the spaces and the corporate spaces, the tech spaces that we're all engaging in right now are built for profit, and how some of these companies are dealing with the problems of hate speech and polarization and leaks and intelligence, propaganda wars, and all that kind of stuff is quite problematic. So I think like thinking about education, I think this digital citizenship education, it is quite important, because through this kind of digital citizenship, you have a new generation growing up that might grow up for a period of years completely digitally, right, in some ways. And I think there has to be care given to the scenario in terms of the political values and how people deliberate online, in what kind of ways we welcome this generation into political culture. And this cannot be an afterthought, that we think, okay, let's save the economy first, and then we'll save political participation for the younger generation later, right? I think this is quite vital, because this influences how people also, these younger people will enter work environments that might completely digital, and how they behave there. It is politically as well very important. So this is what I had to contribute at this point. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor, for your speech. And right now, let me please give the floor to Vyacheslav Lysenko. You're welcome.
Спасибо. Получаю огромное удовольствие от слушания очень компетентных спикеров.
Thank you very much. It is very enjoyable for me to be here and to hear such competent speakers.
Олег, очень хочу поддержать по поводу того, что вы сказали по поводу лжепророков и лжеконсультантов. Ну, очень большое количество вижу людей, которые приезжают от Тони Робинсона, бизнесменов. Извините, ну, вот тут подходит в диком восторге. И я вот так назвал его лучший продавец счастья сроком от недели до 2.
And at this point, I would like to support the point that was made by Oleg Maltsev when he spoke about incompetent consultants. So I personally, I fully believe that there are so many so-called prophets and incompetent consultants. For instance, in Ukraine, we have people that come from Tony Robbins' seminars, and I would term them that they are in certain wild, ecstatic condition. And I actually call Tony Robbins as a seller of a happiness for 2 weeks.
Поэтому чему стоит, наверное, учиться, это как находить достоверную информацию во времена хаоса и огромного количества фейков.
And I think what should be learned is how to find factual information among so many fakes and disinformation.
Как находить действительно эффективных и компетентных консультантов? Это важно.
And also it's highly important to learn how to find competent and truly effective consultants.
Думаю, что нужно учиться, как принимать решения, имея сразу несколько неизвестных или очень мало информации.
And also I think it's important how to make decisions when you have many variables that are unknown or when you have a very scarce amount of information.
Ну, я думаю, что в будущем HR-отделы должны будут готовить людей, персонал в компаниях к испытаниям, это быть стрессоустойчивым и быстро обучаемым.
And in the future, I believe that HR departments should be conducting training for their personnel on how to be more effective and how to be stress resilient.
Если мы говорим о том, что в будущем онлайн станет во многих бизнесах очень важным аспектом, то безопасность станет еще более важным аспектом, потому что чем больше мы уходим в онлайн, тем больше безопасность становится зависимой. Компания становится зависимой от безопасности в онлайне.
And since we have already said that in the future, online mode of working is going to be even more important for many businesses, that means that security as an issue would become even more important for every company.
Ну и здесь вот ответ на вопрос, кто будет востребован, потому что те безопасники, которые были до этого, это как старый материал, это отживший. То есть сейчас нужно будет новые скиллы, новые компетенции в разделе безопасности.
And the question is, who will be in high demand? What type of specialists? Because when we speak about security specialists of the past, I don't think that they would be capable of solving the tasks because we need new type of competence, we need new skills in the sphere of security.
Также по поводу, кто будет еще востребован, это команды или персонал, который умеет быстро и эффективно работать с антипиаром.
And also another category of people who are going to be in high demand is the teams and professionals that know how to work with anti-PR, with people that are basically discrediting or bad-mouthing somebody.
Ну, наверное, ни для кого не секрет, что если сейчас, когда на вас начинается грязная акция, пиар-акция, и вы 3-4 дня решаете, что делать, то, в принципе, это уже ваши похороны.
It should not be a secret for anybody that if now somebody starts a defamation action against you, if you are sitting and thinking for 3-4 days, that would be, I mean, the game would be over for you in 3-4 days.
И это становится уже неотъемлемая часть нашей жизни сейчас.
And all this is becoming a vital part of our lives today.
Ну и сейчас нужно будет планирование делать с позиции с постоянными задаваниями вопросами. А что будет, если это? А что будет, если это? А что будет, если это? То есть если раньше было достаточно одного плана, то сейчас надо иметь много планов на одно и то же будущее.
And when we speak about future planning, it must be said that we have to have several plans. And as a businessman, we have to ask ourselves, what I would do if this happens? What if this? What if that? If in the past it was enough to have one plan, now it is not possible. You have to have several plans for one project or whatever endeavor is.
Ну и я думаю, что планирование должно быть стать намного короче и с постоянным чекингом и коррекцией планов, исходя из изменений.
And this planning has to be brief with constant corrections and adjustments.
Поэтому что делать руководителям и подчиненным? Подчиненным обучаться, а руководителям набирать лучших консультантов, действительно профессионалов.
And as for the question what subordinates should do and what the managers should do, then I would say that subordinates should learn, should upgrade their skills. And as for the managers, they should find competent consultants.
И я думаю, что многие с этой задачей не справятся в будущем.
And I believe that most of the businessmen will not be able to solve this task, to find competent consultants.
Спасибо.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your speech. And by this, the discussion will be continued by Konstantina Slobodinyuk. You're welcome.
Спасибо большое. В большей степени ответ на этот вопрос был отображен в моем письменном докладе, но сейчас я коротко тезисы подытожу.
Thank you very much. In most part, this question was covered by me in my written paper report, but I'm going to provide some brief theses right now.
Первое и основное – это то, что бизнесу придется объективно посмотреть на то, что произошло, и то, что осталось на руинах пандемии 2020.
So first thing that must be done, businesses should objectively look at what has happened and what we have right now, the ruins.
И здесь Athina Karatzogianni полностью права в том плане, что в эпоху диджитализации молодые люди порой консультируют своих родителей, своих старших, потому что они быстрее находят эту информацию, но вот с выводами у них большие проблемы.
So in here, we should take into account that most of the people, they are quite good in finding information, understanding maybe at least to some part the factual state of affairs, but the problem is that people cannot make conclusions.
Следующее, нужно четко понимать, что за это время, за эти 3 месяца был нанесен колоссальный удар по среднему классу Европы и США.
And second thing, which is not less important, is that during this several months, this period in Europe, middle class did suffer the most.
И огромное число людей осталось либо останется без работы в ближайшие 6-12 месяцев.
and a huge number of people will or are going to be without jobs in the near 6 to 12 months.
При этом криминальные организации чувствуют себя, как и прежде, очень уверенно.
Meanwhile, criminal organizations are as confident as they were before.
Это значит, что большое число этих людей будут искать возможность лучшей жизни, и криминал будет предлагать эти возможности. Это то, что обсуждалось вчера на панели дискуссий по криминологии.
And this means that these people that do not have jobs, they will be looking for new opportunities, and the criminal organizations, they're going to be providing those opportunities. And this was discussed yesterday on the panel dedicated to the criminal organizations.
Здесь я полностью согласен с Вячеславом Лысенко о том, что вопрос безопасности будет становиться все более и более актуальным, потому что все больше и большее количество людей будут пытаться зарабатывать любой ценой, как в офлайне, так и в онлайне.
And in this point, I totally agree with the point which was made by Vyacheslav Lysenko, that the security topic is going to become more relevant, and it's going to be relevant as never, because in this crisis, like everybody would be trying to make money, I mean, in any way they can. So security will be a big issue.
Есть еще один очень важный феномен, на который стоит обратить внимание.
And also there's one more phenomena which has to be paid attention to.
Пожалуй, впервые за последние 200 лет, с момента создания вообще такого понятия, как бизнес, стоимость на все, что угодно, товары либо услуги, начинает стремиться к рационализации.
And for the first time from the establishment of the business in the form that we know today, for the first time, I mean, in 200 years, we see that the cost, no matter if it's a cost for good or for the service, the cost itself is becoming more rational.
То есть экономика знака и общество потребления, вот как его называл Жан Бодрияр, начинает движение к рациональной формуле расчета стоимости.
So this economics of science and consumer society, as termed by Jean Baudrillard, is tending towards rational formula of the cost.
И немногие смогут пережить эти изменения.
And not many will be able to survive these changes.
Последние 70-80 лет люди вкладывали огромные капиталы в свои бренды, в свои названия, в некую добавочную брендинговую стоимость. Оказалось, что это не имеет никакого значения сегодня.
In the course of 80 years, so many people were investing huge amounts of money into their brands. And now a situation demonstrates brands do not mean anything right now.
Есть один знакомый фотограф у Олега Викторовича. Раньше он находился в Германии и продавал курсы по лейке за 250 евро. Сейчас его курсы стоят 30 евро.
So there is a photographer, a friend of Dr. Maltsev, and he used to sell the photography courses on how to shoot on Leica camera, and each course used to cost 250 euros, and now he's selling the same courses for 50 euros.
Это лишь пример, один из многих.
And this is just one of the example of many.
То есть всем становится понятно, что на передний план выходят три параметра.
So it is clear and obvious to everybody that at the plan we see three main parameters.
В бизнесе важна цена, качество и способность выполнять обязательства.
In business, what is important is the cost, the quality, and the capability of fulfilling obligations.
И поэтому сегодня в бизнесе требуется новый объективный подход.
And that is why now in business, it is necessary to have a new objective approach.
Я полностью согласен с доктором Мальцевым, что в современном бизнесе нет места всем этим бизнес-гуру, миллионерам, наставникам.
I totally support and agree with the point made by Dr. Maltsev that currently in business, there's no place for unobjective business gurus and other pretending to be fake millionaire parents, etc.
То есть нет места, например, в Киеве есть ряженый хасид, который бегает, прыгает на сцене, раздает всем блокноты и говорит, как мыслить позитивно. Вот таким людям нет места сейчас.
So just to illustrate about whom we are speaking right now, for instance, in Kiev, there is a guy, Hasid, who is jumping all over the scene and distributing different notebooks, the papers to people and explaining how to be positive and that everything would be okay only if you're positive. So we don't need this type of individuals in business.
Конечно же, дураки будут всегда, и поэтому у этих людей будет паства, но она будет уменьшаться в размерах, в разы.
Certainly, the idiots and fools, they will always exist, and they will have their own adherents or followers, but the number of them are going to decrease because of the situation.
Поэтому, на мой взгляд, как бы вот модель, которая сегодня необходима бизнесу, она должна соответствовать 3 параметрам.
So I think this is my personal viewpoint that the model which is necessary today in the business has to conform to 3 parameters.
Сейчас слышно?
Все слышно.
1, 2, слышно?
Да, все слышно, я перевела.
Первое – это некий механизм генерирования клиентов.
So the first parameter of the model, it should be a mechanism that generates the flow of clients.
Второе – это механизм генерирования бизнес-конфигураций.
Second is the mechanism that would generate business configurations.
Расширяет влияние и возможности компании.
Expands, influences impact of the company.
Как на локальном, так и на международном рынке, безусловно.
Certainly on local and on the international level as well.
И третий механизм – это регулирование времени выполнения обязательств.
And the third parameter that I think is necessary is to regulate the deadlines and the time interval of fulfilling the obligations.
И в Институте памяти под руководством Олега Викторовича подобная модель была собрана и проходит сейчас соответствующие испытания.
So in the Institute of Memory, with the guidance of Dr. Maltsev, this type of the model was created and currently it is being tested.
Таким образом, я уверен, что каким бы бизнесом ни занимался человек, вот эти 3 параметра, эти 3 механизма, 3 ящика с механизмами у него должны быть для того, чтобы он мог существовать и развиваться и расширяться.
So it doesn't matter what type of the business is, I do believe that it has to have these 3 parameters and 3 mechanisms so that it can securely expand and continue its activity successfully.
Спасибо большое за внимание.
Thank you very much for attention.
Well, thank you so much, dear colleagues, dear experts, dear speakers. So by this, let me kindly remind you that the key discussion point of our today's panel was business and how post-capitalism would look like. And by this, let me please suggest, I definitely believe that every one of you would like to sum up or summarize his certain conclusions and viewpoints according to the discussion we held today. So right now, I propose to take some time, like approximately 3 to 5 minutes, to talk about your conclusions, about your viewpoints, to summarize our today's discussion panel. So by this moment, let me please give the floor to Professor Geoffrey West. You're welcome, like 3-5 minutes.
Yeah, I'll be very quick because I have to go anyway, I'm afraid. So I've stayed on right as long as I could. So yes, there was a very interesting discussion coming from various different viewpoints. But I think the lesson is very clear that this pandemic could be seen potentially as a catalyst for opportunities for making leaps forward in situations that would have been hard to do in the past. Every major event, whether it's a major innovation, such as the Industrial Revolution or something like the invention of computers and IT, or what now the pandemic, is a discontinuity in socioeconomic dynamics. And so in that sense, it's very hard to foresee what will happen, but it's also very clear that it gives rise, as it has in the past, to a change in viewpoint, but it also gives rise to opportunities that come from that, but also pitfalls. I mean, the one we just heard been discussed, that is the potential increase in crime, and very insidious crime that's going to be much harder to control. So I think that there's, I think it's very clear from all of this discussion that changes in business will definitely take place, both at the local level and at the global level. And that will also be reflected, I think, in changes in society and changes in the structure of our cities, which we didn't discuss in this in this session. Nevertheless, you can't discuss business without also relating it to the structure of the most dominant socioeconomic force on the planet, and that is the rise and dynamic that exists because of exponential urbanization. So these are going to have extraordinary effects in the coming years. So with that, I'll have to leave. I'm late for my next event. So thank you very much. And I really appreciate having been invited to be part of this, and look forward to further discussions from all of you. Bye.
Thank you so much, Professor West. Goodbye. So by this moment, let me please give the floor to Dr. Oleg Maltsev. You're welcome.
Очень благодарен всем участникам панели за крайне содержательную дискуссию.
I'm grateful to every participant of this online discussion for this meaningful talk.
Очень рад знакомству с новыми коллегами.
I'm very glad to meet new colleagues.
Думаю, что такой вот состав, когда сидят практики, люди, которые непосредственно занимаются бизнесом ежедневно, и люди, которые занимаются академической наукой, и вот их расположение на одной панели, как бы, в общем-то, дает почву для очень многих, как бы, идей и размышлений в дальнейшем.
I think that this type of configuration is very useful for the reason that we have business practitioners that do this thing every day, and we have academicians, and this type of group, it generates new ideas.
Да. И я не оптимист.
And I'm not an optimist.
Долгие годы работы меня от оптимизма давно отучили.
Due to many years of work, this taught me how not to be optimistic.
Но я уверен, что любые задачи, которые стоят, они реализуемы.
But I do believe that any kind of tasks that are there, they are possible to be implemented.
И огромное спасибо организаторам за то, что, в общем-то, собрали нас на одной панели, что большая редкость.
I thank all organizers that had organized us in one basically discussion, which is very rare to see.
Я уверен, что это большая практика для каждого из нас.
And I think it's great experience for each of us.
Спасибо большое за внимание.
Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maltsev. And by now, let me please give floor to Vyacheslav Lysenko.
Ну, встреча подошла к концу. Поймал себя на мысли о том, что она прошла на одном дыхании. Ну, это было очень познавательно, интересно, и всегда классно, когда встречаешь профессионалов в своей отрасли, в своем деле, в своей науке.
So here it is already the end of the meeting, and now I do understand that the meeting was just so fast because it's I mean, it's cool when you see people that are professionals in their fields, be it business or be it academia.
Ну, для меня эта встреча была полезна, познавательна. Я там реально, Олег, за вами записал и книги, которые в ближайшее время приобрету, и обязательно попаду в те бизнесмены, которые читали уже эти книги. Спасибо. Ну и Константин, спасибо. Я даже записал себе модели, которым должен соответствовать в будущем бизнес. Ну, потому что действительно да, перейдите.
For me personally, this was very beneficial talk because I also heard a lot of information that I should study in the future. For instance, the books that were mentioned by Dr. Maltsev, I wrote them down, and the models that were mentioned by Constantino.
Ну, я считаю, что сейчас подошло время с таким лозунгом «Изменись или умри».
And I think currently this time can be described as a certain motto: whether you change or you die.
Поэтому я, наверное, тоже не оптимист, но не пессимист, поэтому я выбираю изменяться.
So I do not think I'm an optimist, and I don't think I'm a pessimist either. So I would choose something in between.
Чего и всем остальным желаю.
And I wish the same to everybody.
Ну и спасибо организаторам. Thank you very much.
Thanks to organizers.
Thank you so much. And by this, I guess it's high time we gave the floor to Konstantina Slobodinyuk. Please, you're welcome.
Для меня, безусловно, это прекрасная практика, встреча с коллегами моего шефа, работа в режиме онлайн, обмен взглядами с разных континентов, это бесценно.
So for me personally, this experience is a wonderful experience. It's great to meet in online sphere with the colleagues of my boss, Dr. Maltsev, and also to hear and exchange different ideas that basically are coming from different continents.
Я вот посмотрел на не только эту панель обсуждения, на всю конференцию, и есть одна такая вторая смелая идея.
And so I have looked not only at this panel, but at the conference in general, and I have got the second brave idea.
Вы помните ту концепцию, которую я предложил, она основана на том, что возникает некая научная, экспертная среда, которая работает без границ, да, и объединяет людей с разных стран, с разных континентов.
So the concept of the idea, I have already mentioned it. It's about a certain organization of scientists and experts that have no borders, that can extend its activity to any country globally.
И на этой конференции не было симулятивных ученых, не было каких-то фейковых исследователей, друзей Фергюсона и прочих чудодеятелей.
And I should point out that this conference did not have any simulacra type of scientists, no friends or colleagues of Ferguson and other types of fake researchers.
И поэтому, в принципе, вот это очень неплохая почва и задел, вот как сама конференция, как та площадка Европейской академии наук Украины, которая и могла бы превратиться вот в некую такую структуру.
And I think this panel is quite a good ground and soil that might transform in that type of structure, and also in the partnership with the Academy of Ukraine. And just a note, not the National Academy of Ukraine that was mentioned before.
Зная как бы то, что у меня шеф необычный, он волшебник, то я не исключаю возможности, что это может произойти.
And by keeping in mind that Dr. Maltsev is quite capable of implementing different things very well and very quickly, I believe that this type of thing may emerge quite soon.
Я был рад знакомству с Вячеславом Лысенко, с нашими спикерами. Спасибо большое за внимание. До скорых встреч.
I was glad to meet Vyacheslav Lysenko and with other speakers. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for your kind attention, for your participation. Let me please thank all the speakers, all our dear colleagues, experts. So by this, I believe it's high time we've finally finished the outline panel. So I guess pretty soon, all the conference issues, all your reports and discussion results will be published on the conference website, as well as will be published in a conference collection volume. So by this, thank you so much for your kind attention. See you soon. Good luck.
Thank you. See you soon.